We have already seen that we can place text objects at stopover points, and now it's time to look at all the details of this object type. Basically, there are two different types of text objects that are placed at stopover points and text objects that can be placed freely on the map. We will start with the text objects at stopover points, and as working project I have created a little flight route which starts at London. So we go to the text section, and here we have to select the text objects at stopover points. This is the icon on the far left with the letter T on top of a root symbol, and the second icon, the letter T with the 4 arrows below it, is for the free placeable text objects. So we start with text objects at stopover points. Now I have to activate the text at stopover point. So I check it, and now the text editor has become active, and we see directly we have not only one field for text input, we have 5, so we can place up to 5 lines of text at this stopover point. So I go into the first field and I type the city name of London, press the enter key, and instantly the text appears at the stopover point in the work window. Above the input fields, we have 3 buttons for the text alignment. By default, left aligned is selected, and we have available centered and right alignment. And when you have a look at the work window, then you can see with left alignment, the lower left corner of the text object is placed at the stopover point. And when I select centered, then it is the center of the bottom line of the text, and with right alignment, of course, the lower right corner. So I will switch back to left alignment. On the right of the alignment buttons, we find the font selection menu, and here we can select between 5 different fonts. We will look at the properties of those fonts in a later lesson. By now we simply accept that we can choose between 5 different fonts. And of course, at any time during my work I can go back to the text editor and make changes to my text. This is no problem. Now we should take a closer look at the stopover point. So let's zoom in a little bit more into this root point, and here we can see very well how Vasco da Gama places all the objects one above the other, and I will make the root symbols slightly bigger. So we start with the lowest level. At the bottom we have always the basis map. On top of the basis map could appear any additional map that is placed in this area. And the next type of object is the root line. We can see it here. It is placed on top of the basis map, but below all other objects. The next object in the list is the text object. We can see it here. It is placed above the root line. And then comes the head object. The head object, the airplane, is above the text object, and on top, at the highest level, the root symbol. So this is the default order for Vasco da Gama to place objects at the same point, when all the objects have their default parameters, for example, the height or the altitude parameter. This takes us directly to the additional parameters for text objects, and I will make the root symbols again a little bit smaller so that we can see the text and the head objects well. And I set the alignment of our text object now to centered. And now let's have a look at the parameters below the work window. Settings for the stopover text object. In the first group, position, we find the wheel for the distance parameter. And I will zoom out a little bit. So when I change the distance, our text object moves away from the stopover point. And sometimes this is all what we need to ensure that our text is always visible and has no head object or other object on top of it. So now I will switch from the editor view to the camera view. And here we can see that our text object is lying flat on the ground. And when I now drag the timeline to go ahead in our animation, we can see that the globe, of course, is turning, and our text object becomes more and more difficult to read. Of course, Vasco da Gama offers us a solution. We go back to the editor view, and in the parameters we have the group view. And here we have the parameter face to camera. By default it is turned off, but we can turn it on with 3 axes or with 2 axes. That means that our text object is able to turn over 2 or over 3 axes. Now I select with 2 axes, so by now we don't see any difference, but now let's switch back to the camera view and go to the beginning of our animation, and here we see the first difference. The text now stands upright on the planet, and when I drag now the timeline, then we can see as the globe turns, the text turns as well to always look to the camera. That means the parameter face to camera. So the text is nicely turning to always look into the camera. This is a very important function. So by now our text object has 2 axes available for its movement, for its turn to always look into the camera. And now let's switch to 3 axes, and you have seen instantly that the text object has turned totally horizontal, although the planet at this point is more inclined. Now our text object has total freedom for its movement, so when we use the right mouse button to tilt our view even more, to look more from above, then our text object can incline until it is really lying flat on the ground. But you can see as well, in its effort to always be horizontal, it sometimes disappears in the ground. This effect is due to the different tiles of the map, but we can solve this problem very easily because in the position parameter we have the altitude. So if at some point your text object dives into the ground, then we simply lift it up with the altitude parameter, and now we have it completely visible. So you can see this is very practical if we can get on working directly in the camera view. So I can use the right mouse button to incline, to tilt our camera view again, and beautifully the word London stays totally horizontal and upright. So the parameter face to camera is one of the most important parameters for text objects. So we can check again by dragging the timeline to see if our text at some point of the animation still dives into the earth, like here. So we lift it up a little bit more. So we go to the lowest point here, where the text is still visible. Here we can lift it a little bit more up, and now it is completely seen. So now going back in the timeline, we see now everything is perfect. Now we have ensured the complete visibility of our text object, and we can have a look at the other parameters available. Sometimes we have a situation where we don't want a text object to be always visible during the whole animation, during the whole project. And in the settings group, we have the group fade, and here we can select a fade in and a fade out effect. We have seen this already with the head objects, And this works perfectly in exactly the same manner with the text objects. So since we are at the starting point of our route in London, I can select a fade out effect, and here we can choose between smooth fade, scale or crossfade. So I select smooth fade, and the fade out time, as always, is the duration of the fade out effect, by default 1 second. And the second parameter of the smooth fade is the stop time. That means that at the stopover point at London, the text will be visible during 2 seconds and then starts the smooth fade out. We can check this effect directly from the editor because we are still in camera view, and this is very practical. So I drag the timeline. Remember, we are at the beginning of our route at London, and now I drag the timeline. Our plane moves forward, and now comes the point where the fade out starts, and now the text object has disappeared. And going back again, London appears again. Of course, we can open the real-time preview and play back the animation, and here we can see the fade out effect. So let's switch back to the editor view. If I would place now a text object at the second stopover point, then I could make use of both fade in and fade out effects. That means that when our plane, our head object, comes near the next point, then the text object would be faded in, would be visible during the stop time, and then would be faded out. Another exciting group of parameters for the text objects is the fourth group here, effects. And here we have 6 effects available in this menu, rotating around every one of the 3 axes, bounce, scale and move around a point. And we can not only select one effect for our text object, we can use more than one or even all of the 6 effects at once. Let's try the bounce effect. I select bounce. Now in the next menu, I have to turn it on to activate the effect. And we have 2 parameters. The first one, speed, is the frequency of the bouncing, the speed of the bouncing. And the second parameter, the height. So let's set the speed to, let's say, 200% and the height to 750. And now let's have a look at the real-time preview. We play it back and we see our text London bouncing. Of course, only until it is faded out. So the animation starts over again and we see it again bouncing. So now we can use all the other effects as well. We have to select them, turn them on or off, and every one of those effects has their own set of parameters. Now that we have seen all the 4 groups of parameters here in the settings, let's have a look again at the text editor in the upper right corner. And here we find to the right of the text input the font settings. And here you find the parameters you are waiting for. Here you can set the font size, the color of the font. You can choose if your letters should have a border, and in case of yes, which color the border should have. So this is all very easy. And now it's a good moment to have a look at the Aid to Navigation. Below we have seen the Aid to Navigation window already, but we haven't discussed the 4 buttons in the toolbar here. These buttons are useful when you like to hide some of the object groups. Here we have the route lines, the head objects, the freely placeable objects, and the text objects. Because sometimes when you are working in the editor and you have at some point many objects, it may be difficult to work with some object type, so it would be useful to be able to hide the others temporarily. And this is exactly what those buttons do. For example, here to the right, the button for the text objects. if I click it, the text objects will be hidden. They aren't shown anymore in the editor window, but this does not affect our project in any way. The text objects are still there. Let's have a look at the preview window, and here, of course, our text object London is visible. So these buttons affect only the visibility of this group of objects in the editor window. Another click on the same button and the text objects are again visible. So by now, placing text objects at stop overpoint is no problem for you. This is really very easy. And in the next lesson, we will have a closer look at the freely placeable text objects.